Hello, my name is Christine Hughes, and I am a board member of the Association of Corporate Counsel Northeast chapter. I also serve as the chair of its Pro Bono Committee, and the mission of that committee is to create opportunities for in-house counsel to do pro bono work. I'm enormously privileged today to have Sue Finegan here. Sue is a partner at Mintz Levin and heads up their pro bono activities. And we thought it might be helpful for Sue to share some thoughts about creating an environment in an in-house setting that is conducive to lawyers performing both pro bono work and more broadly civic engagement work, such as voter registration or literacy training. The first thing I would like you to help us understand is, how do leaders in an in-house position make the case for supporting and promoting pro bono work in an in-house setting?
Well, thank you, Christine, for asking that question, because that's really the question that a lot of folks approach this question with, because so many lawyers go to the in-house setting from law firms, and at law firms they have the administrative support. They might have someone like me who's chairing a pro bono committee, and it's much more easy to sort of plug in, and you don't really have to make that case. And so that really is the first obstacle or barrier that most people face that are trying to really start a pro bono program. And it's also just hard to figure out where to begin, right? And so you have a lot of things demanding on your time, mostly your client that you're trying to respond to. So I guess first and foremost, you could think about it in three ways. One, there are benefits to the company. There are also benefits to the employee. And then the third is benefits to the community. I'll start with benefits to the company, because I would think and suspect that if you're dealing with senior leadership, they want to know why it's important for the company as a whole to allow their legal department to do this work. And I would say that it really gives a lot of opportunity for the legal department to kind of work together. And a perfect example of that is the Clinic in a Box that ACC-Northeast promotes every year. A lot of times the legal department will come together and work together in a clinic setting to work with a pro bono client and work together on things that are outside the office. So it's a great way to develop rapport and teamwork. And then also just providing new opportunities and challenges for the staff at the employees of the organization. At the same time, thinking about it from a corporate perspective, like promoting a company's reputation in the community and enhancing that is always something that senior leadership kind of likes to do. And it also allows the legal team to really participate in the broader corporate social responsibility efforts of the company. And then as for the employee, those are a little bit more self-evident, I think, enhancing job fulfillment, honing skills, reminding lawyers why they became lawyers, and making sure that they're fulfilling their ethical obligations as well to give back in the pro bono realm. And then benefits to the community. And those are even more self-evident, I think. We all realize, particularly this year, that the pro bono work we offer really adds value to the communities that we serve. And particularly when they align overall with the corporate social responsibility goals, you can really make a difference, particularly when it's commonly known that at least 3/4 of folks who have legal needs can't access lawyers.
Yeah. I know one of the first things, lawyers being notoriously risk averse as a population, that will spring to the mind of many people watching this is, what about malpractice, liability coverage? Will our company's D&O coverage extend to this? How have you seen folks work through the malpractice and liability insurance issues?
I would say that because, to the very point that lawyers are very risk adverse, this is usually one of the first questions people ask, like, what about malpractice insurance? What about my liability? Which is important to think about. But I will say that's not really the obstacle that it might seem. So sort of at the outset, I'd just like to state that I've been sharing my firm's pro bono program for 14 years, and with the proper, things in place, training and mentorship, and making sure you align with, good legal aid organizations. We have over 30 client matters a year, and we've never had a claim. So I probably shouldn't say that, because I should probably knock on wood.
Overdue for one.
But so it's something to, it's extremely rare, but it's also important that in-house counsel and their corporations are protected, obviously, from legal malpractice. I'd say there's several different options. I'll mention 4. The most in-house counsel that I work with actually rely on the legal services organization that will provide coverage for volunteers. So it's really important when you're thinking about starting a program to align yourself with a legal services organization that provides that in malpractice insurance. And that's sort of because it's the easiest thing to do, and they assume the risk. And with that, they're also going to provide mentorship and training. Like they have an incentive to do that. I guess the only downside to that approach is that you're limited. You're limited to the services that legal aid organizations provide. But with most companies, that's perfectly fine. Other ways of making sure you're covered is, you can actually obtain coverage with a broker under either your existing policies or a new standalone policy. Or the third option is joining an organization that provides liability insurance options to its members. And then the last, some companies that I've worked with actually self-insure. So it's really important before you think about this is to really check with your company's risk management department. And you have to make sure that you're, checking the boxes and making sure you're comporting with whatever obligations they have in that realm.
And this may be a little bit obscure, but does most of us who practice in-house, when we're filing our BBO registration statements, check that we're not required to have malpractice insurance because we're practicing in the in-house setting? Does that change if you're taking on legal work that's not directly related to your in-house function?
So I guess a lot of that depends on how you're handling the insurance. So if you think about those 4 different options, you may be purchasing insurance to do that. So I think it's a little bit nuanced. And what I would recommend is once you've figured that out, I would recommend if it's at all complicated, just calling the BBO and just making sure you're comporting with their standards. So it really depends which option you choose. I'd say most are doing the first, but you don't know. Some people do self-insure, and so you just want to make sure that you're following the rules of the BBO. Far from me to advise anyone to do anything that puts their license at risk.
Sort of in a similar vein, talk a little bit about conflicts management. And I'm thinking of that in basically 2 buckets. One is the way lawyers think of conflicts, which is that I don't want to be opposing someone that I'm representing. And so that's one, is a classic, how do you manage the conflicts in the same way that a law firm manages conflicts? And then I think the second bucket would be kind of conflicts of mission. Are you a petroleum company and taking on an environmental cause? The sort of optics issues. So first, the strict compliance with ethical obligations, and then maybe a little bit about mission conflict.
Yeah, I would say that in embarking on this whole, establishing a pro bono program, I would say the first rule of thumb is that you do not want to be opposed to the position that the interest of your corporate client who you're working with. So I would say the first thing you should do is kind of flip it and identify those conflicts, those kind of positional conflicts from the outset, and really establish clear policies that allow your department to steer clear of those conflicts. And even when you're expanding a program that you have that's gone on for a while, just really that should always stay top of mind. And I've worked with some government agencies actually that this comes up it's even more strict because their in-house team that are working in a government agency, like they can't be adverse to the government at all. So there's a very limited projects that they can do. So at least in the corporate setting, it's a little broader. And the good news is that there are so many options to choose from that these positional conflicts can be easily avoided. And so I think that's the first thing I'd say. And then I think you do need to, the other thing I'd say about that is that, for example, Mintz has this signature project working with domestic violence survivors. And I would say that most companies wouldn't necessarily have a conflict per se with that issue. So if you find an issue that your employees can get around, particularly if it aligns with the corporate social responsibility, then really it just becomes an issue of like that individual who, if you're representing the individual against another individual, then it becomes a little bit easier because you're over the hump of that positional conflict. And then you just have to establish some internal rules about the conflict procedure so that it just becomes much easier. You don't have to worry about, are we a real estate company and we're doing eviction work? You don't have to worry about that. You're just not going to do that work. You're going to do something else.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, we've spent the last 15 months learning to work remotely, and I think many of us will be glad to be together in person in a conference room or at a meeting. But I think there's also been certain advantages. One no longer has to commute and lose time to that. So just special things to think about doing pro bono work in a remote or virtual context.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one that like everyone has sort of faced over the last year, both on the, on your in your paid job and also pro bono world. I would say with the pro bono world, it's really important. It's always been important, but even more so in the remote setting, that you work with a legal aid organization that really provides strong mentorship and training. And I found that it's really important to have lawyers know what's expected of them, almost as a checklist, because you're kind of sitting in your house, right, doing the work on your own. And it's a little overwhelming. You're doing something that might not be something you do every day. And so I think it's really important because you can't just go next door and ask someone for some mentorship or supervision, that you upfront get that training and mentorship built in. And I think that aligning yourself with a legal aid organization or a law firm, even a lot of in-house counsel work with law firms that are up to speed on different areas of the law, is really important. And then the other aspect of it, that it's really important to align with a legal aid organization or a law firm that actually understands and pivots well to the remote world. And so we have programs that we have done with certain legal aid organizations where the mentor is sitting in a breakout room, and you can just like exit for a few seconds and come back in. And I feel like our attorneys feel much more comfortable in that setting, rather than, you're frantically texting someone for advice, or you're kind of out of your element and you don't feel comfortable. So you just want to make sure people are properly trained, that they get the mentorship they need, and that the organization that you're working with understands this remote world. That right now is a little less prevalent. I think most of the organizations have pivoted pretty well by now, but it was really something that we needed to think about early on in the pandemic, when a lot of our legal aid partners were really kind of reeling and trying to get back up on their feet and try to provide remote opportunities. There's some ethical considerations that are a little bit more enhanced, I'd say, in the remote world too, such as confidentiality issues. When you're dealing with clients on the phone and you're working from home and you're in a setting, but those are things that are so concerning in your paid work as well. And then the other aspect that's a little bit complicated and from an ethical standpoint in the remote world is just communications issues. A lot of our clients that we're dealing with may not have access to things like Zoom. They don't have the minutes on their phone, they don't have access to a computer, and so you really kind of have to adapt to that too. And then the last thing I'd mention from an ethics standpoint is just licensure. Like a lot of times we'll open up opportunities like firm-wide or legal department-wide, and people want to participate, but you have to really be mindful that that person might not be licensed to practice. So one workaround to that I'll mention is that, we had worked with one in-house legal team that had some international folks that spoke different languages, and they wanted to participate, and we really needed them. And so what we did as a workaround is we made sure that they were partnered with someone who's licensed in Massachusetts. So you just have to ensure that they're going to be matched with someone who, is licensed, and then they just act as a paralegal as part of the team effort.
That's right. Now, what models have you seen for, lack of a better word, I'll call it accountability, time reporting, time management, resource allocation? Do you track it? Do you not track it? How do you make the case? What sort of models have you seen that work or don't work?
These really run the gamut, but I think the most important point is really from the outset talking about that, and really talking with your company about the end result. Do they want to track outcomes? Do they want to track data? Do they want to have hours? Do you want, as a legal team, to know how many hours people have devoted? I'd say most people, does your company make you record time at all? Because some certain industries have people record their time. I'd say most people are trying to flee the time structure by going in-house, but be that as it may, some organizations do require time management. So I really think about your company, think about what the rules are around recording time, and then think about what your goals are in structuring the program. And then a lot of companies that either do or don't require people to record their time, it's good to put a number on it too, like how many hours are you going to let people do on company time? Is it going to be unlimited? Is it going to be 50 hours. Like you have to kind of think about those things ahead of time, no matter where you end up. And then the other thing to think about, which is not necessarily a time recording issue, but it's also a company resource issue, is are you going to allow support staff, and are you going to allow people to use office equipment, postage costs, all those things that are going to support people in doing the work, whatever that work is. You kind of need to think about that ahead of time, and then sort of develop a policy, I would recommend, to make it clear for everyone, the employees that are doing the work and also the company, so that people know that they're following the rules, whatever those rules end up being.
Okay. And I guess the last question I'd ask, obviously, if leadership in an in-house office is able to persuade the company leadership that this is a worthwhile thing to do, that it's consistent with the mission of the organization is going to want to tout the work that they've done. And so talk a little bit about how you've seen the issues of attorney-client privilege, confidentiality managed in the context of promoting and discussing the work that the lawyers have done for in the pro bono context.
Yeah, I think that's an important element to it, because you want to give recognition to the employees who are doing the work. And then you also want to kind of encourage corporate leadership to buy into it. So that a way of doing that is, for example, sending out internal emails about the work that people have done. We do that at Mintz all the time, and then it kind of creates a buzz and it creates a culture. But I think you're right, in the corporate setting, you have to be a little more careful, I think, right? And so, but I think it's pretty easy to avoid. Like, you can easily describe the outcome of cases. You can describe the projects that you're working on. You can even give like outcomes and data, but you don't have to give the underlying strategic vision for how you got there. So I think you don't have to get into the weeds of the legal strategy and disclose privileged information. And honestly, I'm not so sure like your senior leadership team really cares about that in the weeds, detailed information, but they do want to hear about like amazing stories and the ways that you helped people in the community. I think it's important to know too, like what their expectations are ahead of time. So you can collect the stories, you can collect the data, you can collect the hours if you have to, so that you can report in and you can kind of tout the work and have it be sustaining for a long period of time.
Okay. Well, and in conclusion, you have the eyes and the ears right now, hopefully, of many of the leaders in-house law offices. What would you say to them about doing this work and why it's important?
You know, I've talked to a lot of in-house teams that have started programs, and they've just gotten there's so much enthusiasm for doing this work. A lot of people went to law school to be able to help people, and they want to continue to do that. A lot of the folks on the legal departments have had a history of doing pro bono work their entire career, and they want to continue doing it. And I would just add that there's just so much need, particularly now, that there's so much that we could do as lawyers to give back to the community. Even in limited, discrete ways, you can make a huge difference in someone's life. So it's just really wonderful to hear the feedback from the people who are already doing it. And I would encourage all legal departments to get engaged and get the entire legal department involved in the work. And I would just put a plug in for the Clinic in a Box that the ACC puts on, because the feedback that we get from the attorneys that work on that project is just so overwhelmingly positive that they really feel like they're making a difference in the nonprofits, the way the nonprofits organize themselves. And, it's just a great way to spend 4 hours, really, a year in giving back to the community.
Well, thank you, Sue Finegan.